All right, so reproductive system, we start off with an intro. So your reproductive organs, this is not an organ system for survival. The common purpose is for a male and female to produce offspring. Make sure you know the term gametogenesis. That is the production of our gametes, our egg and sperm. Reproductive cell division is meiosis. You already learned about somatic cell division and Bio 32 with mitosis. But gametogenesis, again, produces your gametes, egg and sperm. This is different from mitosis. Yeah?
Sorry, where are you at?
Male reproductive.
Oh, male.
Yes. So I said we're going to get a heads up or a head start on reproductive. Since female is really long, it usually goes over into lab, so this might prevent us from having to go into lab.
Page 159.
Page 159 in your lecture notes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So the big difference between mitosis and meiosis is mitosis is just one division and you end up with two genetically identical cells from the one that we started with, versus meiosis, it's two divisions, so you split twice and you end up with four cells that are not genetically identical. They're all different from each other, okay, that are now haploid. So make sure you know the difference between a diploid cell and a haploid cell. Diploid means that it has two pairs of each of your chromosomes, which is all of your somatic cells. Gametes are going to be haploid, where there's only one set of chromosomes for each one of those cells. So sperm only have one set of chromosomes, egg only have one set of chromosomes, so when they come together to fertilize, now you have two sets of chromosomes to go off of. One from mom, one from dad. And these are genetic duplicates. These are not. I was pointing the right one for you. We're not really going to get into the ins and outs of mitosis and meiosis. That's not the point here. But just know the general differences between those two processes. So with males and females, we go through meiosis in our reproductive organs to make the egg and sperm. Again, they are diploid, meaning they only have one set of 23 chromosomes. And those egg and sperm come together, and that's when you end up with a diploid cell. Okay, it's going to have two copies of each one of those chromosomes. Okay? And then that zygote that you end up having after the fertilization of the egg and sperm is going to go through many instances of mitosis and develop into a full-fledged human. Well, it is a human, but from zygote to embryo to fetus and then to baby. So gametes are haploid, our somatic cells are diploid. We have 23 sets of chromosomes. These are autosomal chromosomes. They do not have to do with sex. And these are sex chromosomes. Pretty sure you all know this. But is this a male or female?
That's a male.
This is a male. Male have X and Y. Females have XX. So when it comes to whether you're going to have a boy or a girl, it really is up to the male to determine that, because the male is the only one that has the Y to give. So it just depends. Does that sperm have an X or does that sperm have a Y? That's going to determine whether the female has a baby boy or baby girl.
And this is why, too, like, you can find out the gender of your baby before even having, like, an ultrasound
Mm-hmm.
confirm.
Yep.
Female has Y, and you know.
Well, yeah. The male would have the, yeah, but if the embryo, yeah, exactly. So these are autosomal chromosomes that don't have to do with sex. And then we have our two sex chromosomes. We won't get into it in this class, but there is such thing as like intersex, where you can have like two X's and a Y, or an X and two Y's. There's lots of different combinations that can occur. The sex of the child is determined by the sex chromosome carried by the sperm, like I just said. It will have either an X or a Y. Organs are grouped by function. So the gonads are the reproductive organs. So the testes for the male, ovaries for the female. That's where the gametes are going to be made. So our gametes are our sperm and our egg. And the gonads are going to secrete sex hormones. So we're going to get into hormones again and how those hormones are going to contribute to sperm production, egg and follicle development, as well as sex characteristics as well. So they secrete hormones, including testosterone and estrogen. And then we'll talk about FSH and LH, which come from the anterior pituitary gland as well. And so we have accessory sex glands in our reproductive system. These produce materials that support or sustain the gametes. So like for males, like the prostate glands, and we'll talk about bulbourethral glands, seminal vesicles, things like that. Ducts are used to transport, receive, and store gametes. So like with the females, uterine tubes. For males, vas deferens. And then we have also some supporting structures like ligaments and such that we'll talk about that have various roles in reproduction. So a female system is far more complicated than males. You'll learn that our male reproductive lecture is far shorter than the female. There's a lot more going on with females. Females have two separate ducts, the urethra and the vagina. The male has just one combined urinary and reproductive duct, which is the urethra. Females are the site of both fertilization and implantation. We have a 9-month or 40-week incubation period. We have complicated menstrual and ovulation cycles. So we have two different cycles that are happening at the same time, and they do overlap and have to align with each other for certain reproductive events to happen. So we'll talk about those two different cycles. The sexual response is much more widespread and more complex and harder to understand than the male. So the females have the clitoris, the vaginal mucosa, the vestibular bulbs, and the breast, which are all involved in the sexual response. The sexual excitement is analogous with the male erection phase. So the female clitoris is really, really similar to the male penis. It has a hood and a head, and it's super, super innervated, just like the penis is. Very, very similar. And it does erect. It's just on a much smaller scale. Orgasm is similar in male versus female, except with the female, it's not accompanied by ejaculation. There's no refractory period for females, and it's not required for conception, unfortunately. So who run the world, girls? Contraception is a very, very loosely defined term. We can categorize them in three different phases or three different categories. So there's pre-fertilization contraception. This includes the barrier method, copper IUD, and some hormonal methods. So this is where the contraception happens before fertilization can happen. It prevents the sperm and the egg from actually meeting each other. So a barrier method would be a male condom or female condom, a diaphragm, anything that's going to block the sperm from entering into the female reproductive tract. Copper IUD is also pre-fertilization. Copper, so this is a flexible copper T IUD that they put into the uterus of the female. It is really it's a long-term contraceptive. It can stay in you for 10 years, but it's a lot larger than a hormonal IUD, so the entry is really painful and they don't give you any numbing, or why would they? But whatever. But it's copper is toxic to sperm, so it actually kills the sperm before it can actually reach the egg. Pre-implantation it doesn't prevent fertilization from happening. It prevents the fertilized egg from actually implanting on the uterus. Okay, so fertilization can happen, it just prevents the implantation. So hormonal methods can prevent implantation, and then emergency contraceptive like the Plan B pill is going to stop implantation from occurring. So it doesn't stop fertilization. Egg and sperm are still going to meet up and can possibly fertilize that egg, but it won't allow for implantation. Yeah?
What is hormonal?
So birth control. So we'll talk about different there's different combinations of pills that you can take. So like birth control pills use hormones, and it can be estrogen or progesterone or a combination of the two. We'll talk about those though. Yeah.
Is that why if you take Plan B after you've ovulated, it oftentimes won't work? Because you've already released an egg.
No, it prevents implantation, so that doesn't matter. So you can already have fertilization, but it makes it so that the fertilized egg won't stick and it won't implant. Now, if you don't take it correctly, or if you take it too late, then it may not work, and it's not 100% successful either. So you can still have implantation if you take the Plan B.
So implantation is referring to attaching to the uterine?
Yes, implantation is the fertilized egg implanting on the uterine wall and beginning the pregnancy. Post-implantation would be considered abortion after the egg has already implanted and started developing. So you may have heard of a new birth control for men. The new pill comes from the University of Minnesota, and its mechanism of action is to block proteins from binding to vitamin A, which is a key component in sperm production and fertility. If sperm production is targeted, which type of contraceptive would this form of birth control be considered? Pre-fertilization, pre-implantation, or post-implantation? Pre-fertilization. Because if it's messing with or preventing sperm production, the sperm never meets up with the egg. All right, what time are we at? 9:07. We can keep going. Sitting? Oh, yeah, go ahead. All right, so for males, we'll talk about the function of the testes and explain their importance of their location in the scrotum. We'll describe the structure of the penis and indicate its role in the reproductive process. We'll talk about the accessory reproductive organs, the sources and functions of semen, as well as the locations and organ involvement of common cancers involved in the male reproductive system. So male reproductive organs include the testes, the ducts that the sperm travel through, the accessory glands and semen, as well as the penis. So the testes are the primary reproductive organ. In males, we call those the gonads. They have both exocrine and endocrine function. Their exocrine function is the sperm that will be excreted, as well as the testosterone is going to be their endocrine function. What other organs function as both endocrine and exocrine? Pancreas is one of them. Ovaries would be another one. They form on the abdominal cavity in the male embryo. So in the male embryo, these testes are going to be near the kidneys. So way up there. And they begin their descent at around 7 months of fetal development. And they'll have their full descent just prior to birth. And then we'll talk about what can occur if they fail to descend. They lie within the scrotum, and the scrotum is a sac of skin and fascia. Outside the abdominal pelvic cavity. Why the testes are held outside of the abdominal pelvic cavity? It keeps the temperature of those testes 3 degrees Celsius lower than core temperature. And this is really important for sperm production. And so if the testes get very cold. They are pulled closer to the trunk. There's a whole Seinfeld episode about shrinkage. And if the testes get too hot, the muscles will relax to pull them away from the trunk. Keep away from trunk. So it's really important for sperm production for the testes stay a little bit cooler than the rest of the body. Yeah, go ahead.
I used to work in fertility, and we would have the males keep their semen warm, their sperm warm in the arm
Oh, really?
until the doctor had.
Know that the testes are connected to the trunk via a structure called the spermatic cord. And the spermatic cord is a connective tissue sheath. And it's going to hold nerve fibers, blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and the ductus or vas deferens. So more often it's being called the ductus deferens because vas deferens, vas in Latin refers to a vessel, and it's not a vessel. It's not a blood vessel or a lymphatic vessel. It's a duct. So it's now being more correctly called the ductus deferens because that's what it is. But people still refer to it as the vas deferens as well because it's been called that for so long. Okay, any questions about the testes? Anybody still need these notes up? Okay. Good. All right, so what we're going to talk about next is about sperm production. So where sperm is actually produced specifically is in these tubules called these seminiferous tubules. That's where sperm production occurs. These seminiferous tubules are organized in what are called lobules, which are these little sections of the seminiferous tubule. And then once the sperm are produced, they pass through this tube structure here called the ready testis. Then they go to the epididymis, which we talked about during the pig dissection. It'll go to the epididymis over here, which is where the sperm are going to mature and be stored. Okay. From there, the sperm will travel through the ductus or vas deferens and eventually make its way to the urethra, and we'll talk about that. And this is just a front view of all that. And so, again, the seminiferous tubules are organized into lobules. There's about 200 to 300 of these internal compartments or lobules, and each contain 1 to 4 coiled seminiferous tubules. And so the seminiferous tubules are the sperm factories. This is where the sperm is produced. And seminiferous tubules contain 4 types of cells. The first type is spermatogenic cells. That's the sperm producers. Ooh, producers. And then the next cell type are these cells. They're called interstitial cells. They're also referred to as Leydig cells, the guy who discovered them. They are located between the seminiferous tubules and the lobules, and they're responsible for secreting testosterone, which is going to promote sperm production. The ready testis carries the sperm from these seminiferous tubules to the efferent ducts, like the epididymis and the vas deferens. At this point, when they're in the ready testis, though, they're still immature. So the sperm are still immature at this point. Anybody still need this up? Okay. Spermatogenic is one, and the interstitial cells are another, and we'll talk about the next 2 in the next slides.
Okay.
So again, the sperm go from the seminiferous tubules through this ready testis where they're still immature, and then it's in the epididymis that they mature. Right? And then they'll go through the vas deferens, and then we'll talk about the next steps after that. So the other cell types, so spermatogenic cells, we talked about those. Those are the sperm-producing cells. Interstitial cells are secreting the testosterone. Myoid cells, we won't talk about. Those are smooth muscle cells, so you don't have to worry about myoid cells. But cystinocytes, yes, we're going to talk about those. Those are part of the sperm production flow that we'll talk about here in a second. So you only really have to know 3 of the 4 different cell types, because they're going to be important in the sperm production flow that we talk about next. And actually, I think I'll stop there because I don't think I can do it all in 5 minutes. But we'll talk about the sperm production flow when we come back on Wednesday.